Hey out there. Welcome to the breakdown analysis of chapters 2 through 4 of To Kill a Mockingbird. So, this analysis and discussion is assuming that you have read through chapters 1, 2, 3, and 4. So, if you haven't read those first 4 chapters, you should go back and read them on your own before you participate in this asynchronous discussion. So, really, what I'm going to do today is go through chapters 2 through 4 like I would have done in class, pointing out the parts of the book that stand out to me in regard to, what you need to know and pay attention to in order to fully appreciate and understand the book as we move through it. Because this is a challenging book to read completely on your own. So, that's why we're building in these checkpoints for you. So, first, I just want to do a quick review of what we found out about Boo Radley in chapter 1, because this information we just need to have filed away so that every time he comes up, we have a little bit of perspective about who he is and what we learned in chapter 1. And remember, this is the information that got Dill so hooked on who Boo Radley is. It's the information that makes him this mysterious, mythical character that we never see. So, when he was around, according to neighborhood legend, right, there was these two significant events that Scout has heard about and she told us about. One is when he was around 17 years old, he got in trouble with the Cunninghams. They like stole a car, they locked the police officer in the courthouse outhouse, and all of the Cunninghams got sent to the state industrial school, which apparently has a really great reputation. And one of them ended up becoming a veterinarian and went to Auburn. But remember, the Radleys had this predilection, this personal preference for keeping to themselves. And they thought that it was a disgrace for their son Arthur to go to this school that the Cunninghams might go to. So they decided instead that Mr. Radley decided that he was going to keep Arthur at home, and nobody saw him again for about 15 years. And then there was an event that Jem like kind of remembers or at least can tell the story about, but allegedly when he was around 33 years old, and again, nobody's seen him for about 15 years, Mrs. Radley was like running around the street saying, Arthur's killing everybody. And apparently he stabbed his dad in the leg with a pair of scissors. Regardless of what exactly happened, he did get locked in the courthouse basement for a little while, but then ultimately his dad decided not to press charges and then again took him home, locked him up, and nobody saw him. And that's sort of where the legend is. Now, people have all these crazy stories about, what he does at night. And, Jem has all kinds of imaginary ideas of what he looks like and what he does. But the reality is, we don't really know. A lot of it is just neighborhood gossip. And then finally, we talked about how last names are so, so important in this book, um, because there's a stereotype attached to your last name in this small town in Alabama in 1935, the mid to late 1930s. If I introduce myself as Catherine Finch, then you're already going to assume some things about me simply because of my family. Same thing, Catherine Cunningham. You've got some ideas about exactly who I am and what I'm all about just because you know other Cunninghams and you know about my family. What's interesting is that we learned in the first chapter that the Finch family name goes back for generations as cotton farmers. Finch's Landing is this modest but beautiful home where they would farm cotton and they did own slaves. And for years, generation after generation, that's what they did until Atticus and his brother Jack. Atticus became a lawyer, Jem became a doctor. Education took on a new meaning in that family. They moved into town. So that name is changing, but it's important to note where it comes from because later we meet Alexandra Finch, who still holds all the same ideas of the traditional Finch family name. So we've heard a little bit about the Yules were mentioned in like the second paragraph of the book. Haverford was mentioned as synonymous with jackass or donkey or stubborn. Graham was mentioned. We've heard most of these names. We're going to hear more of them in the upcoming chapter. Or you did. If you just finished reading chapters 2, 3, and 4, then you've heard more about the Cunninghams, the Radleys, and the Yules. Okay, so getting into chapter 2, I'm using the PDF because page numbers are going to be really different depending on what version we're using. So, at the beginning of chapter 2, Dill returns to Meridian because school is starting, and Scout's really excited because she's finally getting to start school. And she's really bewildered because her teacher, Miss Caroline, expects to be able to teach her how to read and write, and Scout already knows how to do a lot of these things. So, her first interactions with Miss Caroline are challenging for her. But when it gets particularly contentious is when she has that interaction with Miss Caroline about Walter Cunningham. And Cunningham is a name that we should already be familiar with because the Cunninghams were who Boo Radley was running around with, right? The Cunningham family. But anyway, our understanding of the Cunninghams from this exchange is a little bit different. Specifically, Miss Caroline's trying to give Walter Cunningham a quarter, and Walter's refusing it. And Scout thinks that by saying, Miss Caroline, he's a Cunningham, that's enough of an explanation. Anybody else in town would understand that he's got the last name Cunningham. He's not going to take your quarter. He's too proud. Um, and she didn't understand. So she tries one more time with Walter's one of the Cunninghams, and it's still not enough for her. This paragraph right here is just what she knows, what she knows to be true. And then it gets really specific. We get all the stuff in blue is everything that Scout knows about the Cunninghams as a child. One of the most interesting things about the way this book is written is that we have this older narrator looking back on her time, right? So it's Jean Louise Finch as an older woman looking back at when she was a young child and starting school. But she's limited in these moments by what she knows as a child. So these are all the things that she knows about the Cunninghams. And specifically, that experience has taught her that the Cunninghams don't have money and they don't take money from people because they're too proud. And if they do accept something from you, they will pay you back, but not with money. They'll do it, things that they raise on their farm or, with the extra lumber or whatnot. So her only explanation or frame of reference in that moment for Miss Caroline is, you're shaming him, Miss Caroline. Walter hasn't got a quarter at home to bring you, and you can't use any stove wood. And Miss Caroline's like, I don't know what to do with this child. She's just had it. She's reading, she's writing, she's doing everything she's not supposed to. And now she's making me look stupid in front of the class on my first day of school. And she takes her to the front of the room and she hits her with a ruler. Miss Caroline picked up her ruler, gave me half a dozen quick little pats, and told me to stand in the corner. A storm of laughter broke loose when it finally occurred to the class that Miss Caroline had whipped me. So when she then she turns around, she's like, if you guys keep it up, I'm going to do the same thing to you. And everybody starts laughing because these are kids who get whipped at home with belts. Calpurnia's hand was as wide as a bed slat and twice as hard. Like, this is a time period when kids did wrong, they knew it on their backside. So when Miss Caroline takes a little ruler and just goes and thinks that she has hurt Scout, everybody just starts dying laughing. So Miss Caroline, she's not having a good day. So Scout completely blames Walter Cunningham for what has happened because she doesn't understand it any better than Miss Caroline does. And so Jem, well, first of all, I didn't highlight this part, but I mean, she literally catches him in the schoolyard and starts beating him up, just starts pummeling him. And Jem has to pull her off and say, knock it off, ask her what happened. And Jem, ever the gentleman, asks Walter to come to lunch with them. Sometimes it says dinner, which gets a little confusing. That's just what they call it. So in the middle of the day, they're literally going home for lunch and then going to come back to school because they just have to walk home. So they go back to the Finch's house and they are having lunch. And Scout doesn't understand why Walter Cunningham pours syrup all over his food. And so she says some stuff that Calpurnia does not like. And Calpurnia pulls her into the kitchen and she just tells her what's up and basically says, there's some folks who don't eat like us, she whispered fiercely, but you ain't called on to contradict him at the table when they don't. That boy's your company, and if he wants to eat up the tablecloth, you let him, you hear? He ain't company, Cal. He's just a Cunningham. Hush your mouth. Don't matter who they are. Anybody sets foot in this house is your company. And don't let me catch you remarking on their ways like you was so high and mighty. Your folks might be better than the Cunninghams, but it don't count for nothing the way you're disgracing them. If you can't act fit to eat at the table, then you can just sit here and eat in the kitchen. Calpurnia sent me through the swinging door to the dining room with a stinging smack. So Calpurnia set Scout straight in regard to how she should behave when she's having company at her house. If somebody doesn't act the way that you expect them to, you just let them, like that is what the polite thing to do in that situation, and to not call them out on it. And then I want to point out down here, she goes back to school, right? She goes back to school, and then she has another interaction with Miss Caroline, which she actually lets other people take, right? So Miss Caroline's dealing with, here we've got this last name again. Now we've got the Yule name, Burris Yule. And this kid is so disrespectful and so mean to the teacher, right? He says, let's see, one of the elderly members of the class answered her. He's one of the Yules, ma'am. So he basically tried to explain the same way that Scout did, right? And I wondered if this explanation would be as unsuccessful as my attempt. But Miss Caroline seemed willing to listen. Whole school's full of them. They come first day every year and then leave. The truant lady gets them here because she threatens them with the sheriff, but she's give up trying to hold them. She reckons she's carried out the law, just getting their names on the roll and running them here the first day. You're supposed to mark them absent the rest of the year. But what about their parents? Asked Miss Caroline in genuine concern. Ain't got no mother, was the answer, and their pa's right contentious. Burris Yule was flattered by the recital. Been coming to the first day of the first grade for 3 years now, he said expansively. Reckon if I'm smart this year, they'll promote me to the second. Miss Caroline said, sit back down, please, Burris. And the moment she said it, I knew she had made a serious mistake. The boy's condescension flashed to anger. You try and make me, missus. Little Chuck Little got to his feet. Let him go, ma'am. He's a mean one, a hard down mean one. He's liable to start something, and there's some little folks here. So now we've got some association with the Yule name. There's no mother. The paw is contentious and angry. And now we see this anger streak coming out through Burris Yule. And I guess they don't go to school. They come on the first day, and then the truant lady just says mark them absent for the rest of the day. I do love, it's not really essential knowledge, but my goodness, I love this. He was the most diminutive of men, talking about Chuck Little. But when Burris Yule turned toward him, Chuck Little's right hand went to his pocket. Watch your step, Burris, he said. I'd soon kill you as look at you. Now go home. This kid's like 6 or 7, and clearly, what does he have in his pocket? Like a pocket knife? Like he's like ready to defend himself and the other kids in the class with his pocket knife. And, again, different time, different place, different ways of growing up. But it's just worthy of note that, this guy's ready to defend who he needs to defend with whatever is in his pocket. But he leaves full with all kinds of terrible things to say to the teacher, makes sure she's crying. And, it lights a fire in Scout. She's just had it. Everything that happened at school that day is just not what she expected, and she doesn't want to go back. So this conversation between Atticus and Scout at the end of the chapter is extremely significant. It contains one of the most famous quotes from the entire novel, and one of the motifs and themes that keep coming back over and over and over again. So, something wrong, Scout? I told Atticus I didn't feel very well, and I didn't think I'd go to school anymore if it was all right with him. So that starts this conversation about what happened, and she slowly but surely, tells him. First of all, he said, if you can learn a simple trick, Scout, you'll get along a lot better with all kinds of folks. You never really understand a person until you consider things from his point of view. Sir? Until you climb into his skin and walk around in it. This quote is up in my classroom wall. It has been for years and years and years. And usually at this point, I would point to it and point it out that it's been there since August. Have you noticed it? But really, Atticus said that I had learned many things today. And Miss Caroline had learned several things herself. She had learned not to hand something to Cunningham, for one thing. But if Walter and I had put ourselves in her shoes, we'd have seen it was an honest mistake on her part. We cannot expect her to learn all Maycomb's ways in one day, and we could not hold her responsible when she knew no better. So Atticus is teaching Scout, if you can take a minute, if you can learn to consider how the other person is feeling and what they have been going through, then you're going to get along with people a lot better. If we take a few steps back and we think about what it was like for Miss Caroline, she's fresh out of school. It is her first day teaching. She's got her cute little dress on and she's got her cute little cat story, and she just can't wait to teach everybody, and then she's got one thing after another that is just not what she expected, complete with this little girl who's, putting her in her place, and a boy who, has lice and is yelling obscenities at her, and another little boy who's got a knife in his pocket. Like, it's just not what she expected. Like, she had a rough day. So that's part of what Atticus is trying to teach Scout, and it is one of the lessons that Harper Lee hopes you learn through reading the book. If you can take a minute to think about what it might be like for the other person you're talking to, you're going to get along with them a lot better. And then Scout has this great idea. She says that Burris Yule, he only has to go to school the first day. I don't have to go anymore either. Atticus said the Yules have been the disgrace of Maycomb for 3 generations. None of them had done an honest day's work in his recollection. So this is information we need to be filing away. We're learning about the Yules. We're learning about the Cunninghams. We need this information to understand this book. So he said that some Christmas, when he was getting rid of the tree, he would take me with him and show me where and how they lived. They were people, but they lived like animals. They can go to school anytime they want to when they show the faintest symptom of wanting an education, said Atticus. There are ways of keeping them in school by force, but it's silly to force people like the Yules into a new environment. So some Christmas, when he's getting rid of the tree, where do you take a Christmas tree when you're getting rid of it? My inference here is the dump, right? So when he takes it to the dump and he's throwing it away, the Yules live at the garbage dump. And they don't go to school. What else? Let's see. They didn't have to go to school, for one thing. Another thing, Mr. Bob Yule, Burris's father, was permitted to hunt and trap out of season. Atticus, that's bad, I said. In Macomb County, hunting out of season was a misdemeanor at law, a capital felony in the eyes of the populace. It's against the law, all right, said my father, and it's certainly bad. But when a man spends his relief checks on green whiskey and his children have a way of crying from hunger pains, I don't know of any landowner around here who begrudges those children any game their father can hit. So basically, it's against the law to hunt out of season, but if he didn't hunt out of season, his kids would starve, because it sounds like Mr. Bob Yule is an alcoholic who gets relief checks from the government because he's not employed. So he gets unemployment checks and spends them on whiskey. And so the county turns a blind eye to him shooting animals out of season because otherwise his children would starve. So we're going to compare Bob, the Yules and the Cunningham side by side. They're both poor. They're both white. They're both, uneducated to a degree. But that's where the similarities end and some glaring differences show up. So at the end of after I go over chapter 4, I'm going to show you, side by side comparison to the Yules and the Cunninghams. So, all right. So now we're getting into summer. And, just before summer, we've got some things that are found in the tree. I'm not going to go over these in detail, just to point them out, that if you didn't notice like what the things were, that you should go back and look at them. The tree, that they're the live oaks at the Radley place, they're finding things in the tree. First Scout, then Jem. And then when Dill comes back, they start finding some games to play. They roll the tire, and Jem's mad at Scout, and he rolls her so hard that she ends up in the Radley lot. And Jem has to go run and get the tire. And then they decide that they're going to play the Radley game. And so they're going to act out the family and all the stories that they've heard. That's why we went over, what we learned before. So they decide that that's what they're going to do. And one day they were so busy acting it out that they didn't notice Atticus coming up. And Atticus is like, what are you doing? Like, Atticus is suspicious, right? And Atticus says, give me those scissors, Atticus said. There are no things to play with. Does this by any chance have anything to do with the Radleys? No, sir, said Jem, reddening. I hope it doesn't, he said shortly and went inside the house. Jim, shut up. He's gone in the living room. He can hear us in there. So Scout doesn't want to play anymore. She's scared because of Atticus knowing he didn't say they couldn't play, but, he definitely is suspicious. But this, at the end of the chapter, a lot of people miss this. Atticus's arrival was the second reason I wanted to quit the game. The first reason happened the day I rolled into the Radley front yard in that tire. Through all the head shaking, quelling of nausea, and Jem yelling, I had heard another sound, so low I could not have heard it from the sidewalk. Someone inside the house was laughing. So when Scout was rolled into the yard and fell out of the tire, someone was laughing at her being in the yard. So it's just something to file away. All right. I'm going to show you a side-by-side comparison of Cunningham and Yule, and then we'll be done with these chapters. Okay. So this is strange to be in the middle here, but this is a Venn diagram showing the Cunninghams versus the Yules. And here in the middle, we have what they have in common. And both families are poor, both families are white, both families are relatively uneducated, but for really different reasons. But compared to the Finches, uneducated families. Sometimes people don't realize that they're white. The reality is, and since we are in the around 1935 Macomb County, Alabama, which is based off of Monroeville, Alabama, everybody at Scout and Gem School is white. There is another school and another church and another everything on the other side of town because this is an extremely segregated time. So there are no Black students in Scout's school. I mean, everybody at the school is white. So over here on this side, we have the Cunninghams and some of the details that we learned about them in this chapter. These chapters, they're very proud. They won't take anything that they can't pay back. And they're polite. The reason why they leave the school, the reason why they're uneducated is mostly because the kids have to leave at the end of the year to help with the harvest. So they spend most of the year at school, but then they miss a huge chunk of the school year each year. But they own their land. That was a huge part of Scout's knowledge of the Cunninghams is that they own their own land. And Mr. Cunningham keeps mortgaging it. He keeps working on his entailment because he doesn't want to lose his land. There's some talk in the chapter about how he could get a WPA job and make some really good money, but then he would lose his land. So he's not willing. He's really proud about owning land, and he's not willing to give that up. While the Yules, they don't own any land. They live off the county, and they live at the dump, just on the outskirts of the garbage, kind of getting whatever they can from what people put into the garbage heaps. The dad does get unemployment checks, but he spends it all on alcohol. And so he hunts out a season. They're mean. They expect to be treated well, and they are not very nice. They don't go to school at all. They go the first day to keep the truant lady off their backs. And that's why they as a family, they can't read or write. So that's a breakdown of these two families. And it's very important that you understand the differences between them moving forward in the book. You should read chapters 5 and 6 next, and we will be discussing them together at our next class meeting. So see you then. Let me know if you have any questions.